Settlers began farming in Montgomery County in the late 1600s. Land patents were granted to speculators from the Chesapeake area. They didn't actually live here. Slaves and tenant workers farmed the land to produce this state's sole cash crop, tobacco. Architectural historian Claire Kelly says their buildings were very small and utilitarian.
Most of the structures were just one-story log buildings, and there were tobacco houses, dwelling houses, meat houses, spring houses. All structures are basically called houses in this time period.
In the 1700s, tobacco houses were the second most common building type in Montgomery County. Today, they are very rare. One of the county's few remaining tobacco houses can be found on the Brandenburg farm in Damascus. It's an excellent example of a typical tobacco house.
In this area, they use stone chinking between the logs, and typically they would be shingled with wood shingles or sometimes thatch. And in the inside of the buildings, they had cross poles that were used for hanging the tobacco for curing.
For more than a century, county farmers cultivated tobacco. By 1790, 1/5 of all tobacco exported from Maryland came from Montgomery County. But eventually, that had to change.
One-crop farming took a real toll on the land, and by the beginning of the 1800s, the soil was depleted of nutrients. So a lot of the population actually left Montgomery County. In the 1830s, we had a drop of about 1/5 of the population that left in search of better land. And Montgomery County was considered the Sahara of Maryland. The soil was just in such bad condition.
One group that stayed was the Quakers of Sandy Spring. They began to look at farming more scientifically by experimenting with crop rotation and using fertilizers. Around this same time, a new transit route opened, the C&O Canal. There was now a way to ship produce out and supplies in. Slowly, agriculture in the county began to revive. Farmers from Pennsylvania migrated in search of cheaper land. They practiced diversified farming and brought a new building style with them.
Bank barns are very common in southern Pennsylvania, and they also were being built in Montgomery County. We're at the southernmost edge of the bank barn domain. You don't really find them much farther south than this part of mid-Montgomery County in the state of Maryland.
Bank barns are built into a hillside and feature 2 levels. The stable is located on the downhill side. This is where livestock is housed. Grains and hay were processed and stored on the upper level.
We have many examples that remain of bank barns in the county. This one here at the Buzzard Farm was built in 1898, and it's a great example of a bank barn. Typically, bank barns had stone foundations and often were timber frame construction. And the timber frames, each wall was constructed on the ground in what's called a bent. And each wall had to be raised up as a unit. And so a barn raising was really a community affair, and it required scores of farmers coming together to help construct the barn.
The largest bank barn in the county can be found on the White Carlin Farm near Poolesville. Measuring 140 feet by 45 feet, it once housed 87 cows and 12 horses. A few of the county's bank barns were made of stone. The Trundle Farm in Martinsburg is a good example. It was built between 1816 and 1835. The Woodlawn Barn near Sandy Spring is another stone bank barn. Built in 1832, it features a 2-level loft for extra storage.
One of the things that was really remarkable about bank barns, they transformed the landscape. The tobacco house was a very small scale and similar scale to dwelling houses, but the bank barn was of a size that had not been seen before in the county.
At the beginning of the 20th century, things began to change again. Montgomery County farmers were expanding into milk production. This was due to advances in transportation, technology, and science. Dairy farms were popping up all over, along with a new type of barn.
The dairy barn was a new type of building that farmers started building in the 1930s. And they're characterized by concrete block construction, and the concrete was very easy to clean and to keep sanitary. And then there was also a new kind of roof. The gambrel roof has a braced frame construction, and it allows for a very large hayloft that's a big unobstructed space where lots of hay could be stored.
By the mid-20th century, more than 300 dairy farms operated in Montgomery County. A majority of the milk consumed in Washington, D.C. was produced in this county's pastures. Maple Spring Farm on Darnestown Road was one of the leading dairy operations in the state. Thomas Moore Garrett built this 19-bay dairy barn in 1942. W. Lawson King ran the 300-acre Irvington Farm in Rockville. Known today as King Farm, this was only part of his dairy operations. Other dairy barns can be found at the Bellward Farm in Darnestown and at the Charles Browning Farm near Hyattstown. As the 20th century progressed, Montgomery County suburbs began to spread further out from Washington, D.C. This county's agricultural lifestyle and economy was in jeopardy. In 1980, the Montgomery County Planning Board established the Agricultural Reserve, setting aside nearly 1/3 of the county's land for agriculture. Today, county farmers have once again adapted their land use.
Farming has continued to thrive in Montgomery County, and it has changed to serve a changing population. The largest segments of the farm economy now are horses and horticulture. The traditional farming is less a part of the economy than it was, but even so, last year brought in over $30 million in sales. There's over 500 farms in the county, and the majority of them are family-owned, and many of them are operated by successive generations.
The county's master plan for historic preservation helps to protect the many historic barns that still dot our landscape. Tax credits exist for owners who restore their old barns, and in some cases, this results in new uses for these old spaces.
Barns have been reused in many ways. They're very well-made structures that lend themselves very well to new uses. Some barns have been converted to residential use, and in other cases, owners have changed their barns into recreational purposes.
All these beautiful and varied structures add to the fabric of our community, as well as provide opportunities for hands-on history.
It's almost like a three-dimensional textbook. You can read about farming and about these buildings, but unless you actually see them in the landscape, you don't really appreciate the history that is so important to the county.